I died the night of my engagement party, and I died humiliated. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the cameras flashed like stars, and every guest toasted to the future Mrs. Marcus Hale. I was the jewel of high society, the darling of magazines, the heiress every brand wanted to wear. But by midnight, my name was poison. A video leaked across every screen in the room, me, in a hotel room with a man who wasn't Marcus. The crowd gasped, phones lit up, and within seconds I was trending worldwide as a scandal. I remember Marcus's face more clearly than anything else. His jaw clenched, his eyes cold, and in front of the cameras he said he couldn't marry a liar. He dropped my hand and left me standing alone in white while the world devoured me. I tried to explain, I begged him to believe me, but no one listened. The footage was fake, but Ethan, Marcus's business partner, had made sure no one ever learned the truth. He had orchestrated the leak to destroy me and secure his place at Marcus's side. It worked. Sponsors cut ties. My family turned their backs. Friends vanished. I became a headline, then a punchline, then nothing at all. I died in disgrace, my name a curse. And then, I opened my eyes. The chandeliers were glittering again. The music was the same. The bouquet was heavy in my hands, the cameras flashing as Marcus smiled beside me. It was the same night. The same engagement gala. I froze, but only for a moment. Because I remembered. I remembered every word, every sneer, every betrayal that came after. My heart pounded, not with panic this time, but with fire. I knew who had destroyed me. I knew how he did it. And this time, I wasn't the fool standing helpless while my world collapsed. I adjusted my smile for the cameras, leaned into Marcus's arm, and let everyone believe I was the same perfect bride-to-be. But behind the calm facade, I was already planning. Ethan thought tonight belonged to him. He thought he could humiliate me again, make me the headline, the scandal, the ruined heiress. But tonight, when the footage dropped, it wouldn't be my name the world devoured. It would be his. The moment I realized I was back, I forced myself to breathe through the shock and wear the same smile everyone expected from me. If anyone sensed a shift, the game would end before it began. Marcus leaned down, whispering sweet nothings for the cameras, his arm heavy around my waist like a chain. I looked up at him and nodded, the perfect fiancé, but inside I was already charting the path of his betrayal. He would abandon me again tonight when the video went live, cast me aside to protect his image, and Ethan would stand smugly at his shoulder, pretending to be outraged while he was the one who had arranged it. I remembered every detail, and now those details were mine to weaponize. I moved through the party with calculated grace, accepting congratulations, laughing at jokes, sipping champagne, while my eyes searched for Ethan. There he was, across the ballroom, his smile sharp, his gaze flickering constantly toward his phone. I remembered that expression. It was the same one he had worn right before the footage was unleashed last time. He would be waiting for the signal, waiting for his contact to confirm the drop. My lips curved faintly as I passed him, pretending not to notice. He thought he was the spider, but tonight he was the fly. Lila hovered nearby too, Marcus's mistress then and now, her eyes cutting into me with satisfaction. In my first life her smirk had broken me, because I hadn't known she was the one amplifying the fire online, feeding gossip to influencers, pushing hashtags that destroyed me. This time I caught her gaze and smiled sweetly, as if I had no idea what she was plotting. Let her underestimate me again. Her arrogance would make her sloppy, and I would use it. I excused myself from Marcus's side, telling him I needed a moment to fix my makeup, and slipped down the hallway toward the service entrance. I remembered where Ethan's courier had gone last time, slipping through the back with the USB that held the doctored footage. And just as before, there he was, a young assistant clutching a sleek black envelope, checking his phone nervously. He didn't even notice me until it was too late. I pressed a folded bill into his hand, smiled with the confidence of someone untouchable, and told him Marcus had asked me to collect it instead. He hesitated only a moment before surrendering it. That was the flaw with men like Ethan, they hired people who could be bought for almost nothing. I slipped the envelope into my clutch, my heart steady, not racing. Inside was the video that had once destroyed me. Now it was mine. I slipped back into the ballroom, catching Ethan's eyes as I returned to Marcus's side. His smile widened, expecting victory, not knowing that I was holding the key to his ruin. Marcus raised a glass to toast, cameras flashing, guests applauding, and I lifted my own with the same perfect smile I had worn in my first life. But inside, I whispered to myself, tonight the world will still watch someone burn, but it won't be me. It will be Ethan. The video was scheduled to go live just before midnight, the perfect hour to dominate every trending feed while the world was still awake. I remembered the exact moment from my first life, the sudden gasps, the silence before the whispers, the way Marcus's grip on my hand went rigid before he tore it away. This time I waited calmly, sipping champagne as the countdown approached, Ethan standing smugly at the edge of the ballroom, glancing at his phone every few seconds. He thought he was clever, thought no one would ever trace the leak back to him, thought my reputation would crumble again while he stood safe in the shadows. But shadows don't protect traitors when the light is aimed their way. I slipped into a quiet alcove and unlocked my phone, pulling the USB from my clutch. With a few taps, I uploaded the doctored video to a private server, but not the way Ethan had planned. Instead of it being tagged with my name, I altered the metadata, redirected the accounts, rewrote the captions, and set the drop to expose him. The beauty of technology is that it doesn't care who you are, it only tells the story of the fingerprints left behind. And this time, the fingerprints belonged to Ethan. When I returned to Marcus's side, the ballroom was buzzing, anticipation hanging in the air though no one yet knew why. Ethan kept checking his screen, his smile twitching wider, certain the moment of my downfall was near. Lila leaned close to Marcus, whispering something that made him chuckle, both of them waiting for the chaos they believed would break me. I raised my glass, my heart cold and steady, and the first gasp rippled through the room. Phones lit up. Screens flashed. A video had gone live, just as before. But this time the footage didn't carry my name. The overlays, the captions, the edits all painted a different story. Ethan Grant, the brilliant partner of Hale Enterprises, caught on tape manipulating videos and blackmailing for profit. The video cut to screen recordings of his messages, his contacts, the very files he had prepared to destroy me. His smug grin froze the moment he realized what the crowd was seeing. Murmurs turned into shouts, phones raised, eyes darting from him to me, then to Marcus, whose smile collapsed into confusion. Lila dropped her glass, the champagne spilling across her dress as she read the captions, realizing her ally was being dragged in front of the entire world. Ethan tried to deny it, tried to grab for Marcus to defend him, but the crowd was already pulling back, recoiling as though he were diseased. "Fake," he muttered, his voice cracking, "this is fake." But I had learned something the night I first died. It doesn't matter what the truth is, only who controls the story. And this time, I controlled it. I touched Marcus's arm lightly, a picture of composure as I whispered for only him to hear, "It's starting." He looked at me in shock, his eyes darting between me and Ethan, but I only smiled for the cameras now recording every second. The first time I had been the victim. Tonight, I was the executioner. The ballroom was chaos, the kind of chaos I remembered too well from my first life, except now I stood in the center of it untouched. Gasps erupted, heels clicked as guests stumbled away from Ethan, their perfect masks of civility cracking into glee at the scandal unfolding in real time. High society devours its own, and once it tastes blood it doesn't stop. Ethan clawed at his phone, trying to delete files, but it was useless. The video had already gone viral, spreading like wildfire across every social platform, plastered with headlines he couldn't control. I had planned it that way, seeding it to journalists and influencers before the gala even began, ensuring that the drop would be amplified beyond repair. He had no idea how thoroughly I had prepared for this. Marcus stared at him in disbelief, jaw tight, face flushing as he read the comments flying across the screens around us. Hale Enterprises was now being tagged alongside words like fraud, scandal, blackmail. For a man obsessed with his image, this was poison. He looked between Ethan and me, confusion flickering, because in his mind I was supposed to be the one destroyed. He couldn't reconcile the picture in front of him with the one he had lived once before. Lila, poor foolish Lila, was frozen beside him, her mouth parted in horror as she realized the man she had helped support had just set fire to himself in front of the entire city. She glanced at me then, as if searching for some explanation, but all she found was my calm smile, the one that said I had known exactly how this night would end. Ethan tried to laugh, a high, shaky sound that cracked against the ballroom's marble walls. "This is a setup," he barked, his eyes darting toward Marcus. "You know me, Marcus. You know I'd never," but Marcus pulled his arm away in disgust, already calculating the damage. I leaned in just slightly, keeping my voice low enough that only the microphones of nearby journalists could pick it up. "It's funny, isn't it? How betrayal always comes from the one closest to you." The words were meant for Marcus, but they were also a dagger for Ethan, and I knew both men felt the cut. Security moved in at Marcus's signal, but by then it didn't matter. Ethan's protests, his denials, his curses, all of it was filmed, streamed, clipped, and replayed. His empire of whispers and shadows collapsed in minutes. The very people who had toasted him hours ago now turned their backs, some even smirking as though they had never once praised his brilliance. That was the truth of high society, loyalty only lasts until someone else bleeds. I watched it all without flinching, remembering how the same crowd had devoured me before. Tonight I gave him a better meal. Marcus rounded on me then, fury and suspicion warring in his eyes. "You knew," he hissed, low enough for only me to hear. I tilted my head, my smile never wavering. "Of course I knew. Did you think I'd let history repeat itself?" He froze, confusion deepening. He didn't understand what I meant, couldn't, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the seed of unease I had planted in him, the sense that I wasn't the helpless pawn he thought he married, but something far more dangerous. The party didn't end gracefully. Guests excused themselves quickly, some feigning headaches, others pretending they had early meetings, but everyone leaving with the same hunger in their eyes. They would dine on this scandal for weeks. Marcus tried to salvage the evening, but the photographs told the real story, Ethan being dragged out, Marcus scowling, and me standing at the center in perfect composure, untouched, radiant, untouchable. That image alone would be enough to shift narratives. I had gone from almost victim to the woman who stood firm while her fiancé's empire cracked beneath him. And though Marcus didn't realize it yet, this was only the beginning. Back in the privacy of the limousine, his anger boiled over. "What did you do?" he demanded, gripping the seat so tightly his knuckles whitened. "You think I don't see it? That was your work." His voice was sharp, accusing, but beneath it there was fear. I turned my head slowly, meeting his glare with calm defiance. "I did what had to be done. You can either thank me for saving your reputation or resent me for outmaneuvering the man who would have destroyed us both. Either way, Marcus, I win." He flinched at the certainty in my tone, because he wasn't used to me speaking like that. In my first life I had begged him to believe me, pleaded for his protection, lowered myself to keep his approval. That woman was gone. This new version of me wore her power like a second skin, and Marcus didn't know what to do with it. For the first time I saw uncertainty in his eyes, and it thrilled me. I was no longer his ornament, his silent bride. I was the storm he couldn't contain. Later, when we arrived at his penthouse, he tried again to confront me, pacing, demanding explanations, accusing me of plotting. I let him rant, let him think his anger still mattered, before stepping close enough that he had to stop. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice like silk over steel, "you've only just begun to realize that you don't control me anymore. I control this game now. And if you want to keep your empire standing, you'd better learn quickly which side you're on." He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, and that was the point. I wasn't the Rose who once died begging for scraps of his loyalty. I was the Rose who had been reborn, armed with memory, rage, and precision. Ethan had been the first to fall. Marcus would come later. But tonight, as the city buzzed with the scandal of Hale Enterprises and the betrayal at its core, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the flames rise higher. For the first time, I wasn't the one burning. I was the one holding the match. The city woke up to headlines that painted Ethan as a monster. His face was plastered across every news site, every gossip column, every feed. Words like fraud, liar, and blackmailer clung to him like a second skin, and for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't the golden boy of Hale Enterprises but the pariah. I scrolled through the chaos in silence from Marcus's penthouse balcony, watching the world devour the man who once destroyed me. I had dreamed of this moment in the years after my first downfall, dreamed of the day he would choke on the same fire he had lit under me. And yet, this was only step one. Marcus stormed in behind me, his phone pressed tight to his ear, shouting orders to his lawyers and PR team. He barked demands, his voice cracking with desperation, but the truth was clear, he was shaken. In my first life, I had been the one begging and panicking while he played calm strategist. Now the roles were reversed. I leaned against the glass railing, calm as stone, watching him unravel. He noticed, of course. "You're enjoying this," he accused, lowering his phone. His glare was sharp, his jaw tight, but I only tilted my head with a faint smile. Why shouldn't I? Ethan finally paid for what he did. Marcus narrowed his eyes. And what exactly did he do to you? His tone was suspicious, searching, but not yet knowing. He didn't remember the whispers he himself had helped fuel in my first life, the cold way he had let me take the fall when Ethan spread the footage. He didn't remember the way he had told me to accept it quietly to save his career. But I remembered. Every word. Every silence. Every knife. The truth was that Marcus wasn't innocent, he had stood by while Ethan cut me open. He had let me die under the weight of scandal, and though he hadn't pushed the knife himself, he had done nothing to stop it. And for that, his turn was coming. But not yet. Marcus was still useful. He had power, connections, wealth, all of which I intended to strip from him piece by piece until he had nothing left. I wanted him to feel the exact same helplessness I had once felt, to watch his empire crumble while I stood above him. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I didn't need to check to know who it was Adrian. In my first life, Adrian had been a quiet figure in the background, a junior partner at one of the rival firms, overlooked, underestimated, ignored. But I remembered the one moment he had looked at me differently, after the scandal, when everyone else avoided me, he had been the only one to offer me a handkerchief in the bathroom as I sobbed, though he hadn't said a word. I had been too broken to notice then, but now I remembered. Adrian was not Marcus. He was not Ethan. He wasn't highborn or gilded in power. But he had loyalty written in the way he carried himself. And in this life, I intended to use that loyalty, to build with him, to rise with him, and maybe, just maybe, to love him. I slipped my phone back into my clutch before Marcus could notice, turning to face him with a calm expression. "Focus on your company," I told him, my voice soft but edged with command. "Ethan is gone. Your name can survive this if you act quickly. But if you lose control now, everything will collapse." He blinked at me, startled by my tone. He wasn't used to me giving orders, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded stiffly and stalked out of the room to take another call. The power shift had already begun. In my first life, Marcus had dictated every move, every choice, every breath I took. Now, he was reacting to me, following my lead without even realizing it. That was the true revenge, not just to survive, but to invert the very balance of power until the man who once held me by the throat found himself dancing in my shadow. That evening, as the city's lights glittered like fire beneath the night sky, I opened Adrian's message. "I know it was you," it read. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with exhilaration. He wasn't accusing me. He was acknowledging me. Adrian had seen through the spectacle, recognized the hand that had pulled the strings. And instead of exposing me, he was reaching out. I smiled, my heart steady, already planning my reply. For Marcus, this was only the beginning of his fall. for Ethan, it was already too late. But for me, for Rose, it was the beginning of an empire built on ashes. Adrian's message lingered in my mind long after I read it. I know it was you. Not a threat, not blackmail, not even judgment, just acknowledgement. In high society, where everyone wore masks and knives hid behind smiles, such words were rare. And they carried weight. I didn't reply immediately. Timing was everything, and I wouldn't let him think I was desperate or careless. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my purse and let Marcus stew in his own chaos. By morning, Ethan's downfall had mutated into a full-blown scandal. Investors were pulling out, regulators circling, journalists feasting. Ethan himself had vanished, his accounts frozen, his face nowhere to be found. I knew he was hiding, waiting for the fire to cool, but it wouldn't. I had already planted enough evidence in the right hands to ensure he never surfaced again as anything more than a disgraced ghost. Watching his name burn across headlines, I felt a satisfaction that no words could capture. He had stolen my dignity once, shattered my future, and forced me into silence. Now he was the one silenced, and the city had no mercy. Marcus, however, was not blind. His suspicion toward me deepened with each passing day. He watched me closely, asked questions in roundabout ways, tried to corner me into revealing something. But I was careful. Every move I made was calculated to keep him off balance. When he demanded to know how I had stayed so calm during Ethan's exposure, I smiled sweetly and said, "Because I never trusted him the way you did." It was the kind of answer that sounded plausible, even wise, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe it fully. Good. Let him doubt. Doubt was a poison that would eat at him slowly. Meanwhile, I arranged my first meeting with Adrian. It was in a quiet cafe off the main avenues, a place no one from our world of luxury and power would bother to visit. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with his sleeves rolled up, a coffee in front of him, his dark eyes sharp but steady. Unlike Marcus or Ethan, Adrian didn't look at me like a trophy or a pawn. He looked at me as if I were human. That alone was enough to unsettle me. "You played that perfectly," he said without preamble when I sat down. Ethan never saw it coming. I sipped my coffee, feigning indifference, though my pulse thrummed. "What makes you think it was me?" I asked, tilting my head. His lips curved faintly. "Because I've watched you, Rose. You used to disappear in a room, but not anymore. You wanted this. And you're not done, are you?" His voice was quiet, certain, and I didn't bother denying it. Instead, I leaned forward slightly and whispered, "I will never be done until they all know what it feels like to lose everything." Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't warn me to be careful or tell me I was going too far. He just nodded slowly, as though he understood. "Then let me help you." The simplicity of the offer rattled me more than I expected. No strings, no smugness, no hidden motives, just a man willing to stand by my side. It was dangerous to trust anyone, I knew that. But I also knew I couldn't dismantle Marcus's empire alone. I needed allies. And Adrian, overlooked by society, underestimated by everyone, was the perfect ally. When I returned to Marcus's penthouse that night, his suspicion had grown into simmering anger. He was waiting for me in the darkened living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You're hiding something," he said bluntly. "You walk around like you know more than me, like you've already seen the ending of this story." I stepped closer, unafraid, letting the shadows wrap around me like armor. "Maybe I have," I murmured. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, but I didn't stop. "You should be grateful, Marcus. Without me, your precious reputation would have gone down with Ethan's. Instead, you're still standing. You should be thanking me, not interrogating me." He slammed his glass down, the crystal shattering across the marble floor. "Don't test me, Rose." His voice was low, dangerous. I met his gaze without blinking, a calm smile on my lips. "Don't test me, Marcus." For a long moment, the tension hung thick between us, the air electric with unspoken war. Then he turned away, running a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath. He wasn't ready to face the truth, that he no longer controlled me. As I retreated to the bedroom, I glanced at my phone. A new message from Adrian waited. "I've found something. Call me." My fingers hovered over the screen, excitement thrumming in my veins. Whatever it was, I knew it would be another piece of the puzzle, another weapon in my arsenal. Marcus thought he was still the king, but he hadn't yet realized the board had changed. I wasn't his queen anymore. I was the one moving the pieces. And when the game ended, Marcus Hale would know exactly what it felt like to be ruined. Adrian's discovery was more powerful than I could have imagined. When I finally called him, his voice was steady but urgent, telling me to meet him in his office after hours. I slipped away under the excuse of a charity dinner, leaving Marcus brooding alone, and when I arrived, Adrian placed a folder in front of me with the kind of precision that made my heart pound. Inside were financial documents, records that Marcus had buried deep under shell companies and offshore accounts. They revealed a truth the world had never seen, that Marcus Hale wasn't just a polished businessman but a fraud who had been laundering money through fake subsidiaries for years. He had propped up his empire with illusions, and without those shadows, Hale Enterprises would crumble in days. I stared at the pages, my pulse steady, my lips curling into the smallest smile. "With this," Adrian said quietly, "you can end him." I closed the folder, meeting his gaze. "No," I corrected, "with this, I can make him beg." For the first time since my rebirth, the vision of Marcus on his knees flashed vividly in my mind, not as a fantasy but as an inevitability. Adrian leaned back, watching me with those dark, unflinching eyes, and asked if I was ready to destroy everything. My answer was simple. I'd been ready since the day he let me burn. The next morning, Marcus grew more restless. He had noticed the shift in power, though he couldn't yet name it. He prowled the penthouse like a caged animal, snapping at his assistants, barking into phones, and glaring at me as though I held answers he couldn't reach. He was right, of course. I did hold them. At breakfast he tried to bait me, accusing me of meeting someone, of betraying him, his voice laced with suspicion and bruised pride. I only smiled and asked if he was projecting. His silence afterward was telling. Marcus Hale, who once dismissed me as nothing more than an accessory, now couldn't stand the fact that I had become untouchable. And it was only the beginning. Adrian and I moved quietly, weaving a net around Marcus that tightened with each passing day. He supplied me with documents, contacts, leaks carefully timed to erode confidence in Marcus's leadership. Shareholders began to whisper, allies began to pull back, and journalists circled with the scent of blood in their noses. I appeared by Marcus's side at galas and board meetings, poised and perfect, while feeding the fire beneath the surface. It was intoxicating, watching him lose control, watching his empire slip grain by grain through his clenched fists. In my first life I had begged him to protect me from the wolves. In this one, I was the wolf, and Marcus was bleeding. But amidst the fire, there was Adrian. He wasn't just an ally anymore, he was becoming something I hadn't expected, something dangerous in its own way. He listened when I spoke, truly listened, not like Marcus with his distracted nods or Ethan with his calculated interest. He believed in me, not as a pawn but as a force. And in the quiet moments after strategy sessions, when our hands brushed over the same document or our eyes met across a dimly lit room, something unspoken grew between us. It scared me, how much I wanted to lean into it, how much I wanted to feel more than revenge. But I couldn't afford weakness. Not yet. Marcus grew desperate as the cracks widened. He called emergency meetings, slashed at phantom enemies, and started drinking more heavily than I'd ever seen. One night he confronted me again, his tie undone, his eyes bloodshot, demanding to know how I stayed so calm while everything collapsed. I looked at him, this man who once stood untouchable, and told him the truth cloaked in half a lie. Because I've already lost everything before, Marcus. This doesn't scare me anymore. He didn't understand the weight of the words, but they unsettled him. He threw his glass against the wall and stormed out, leaving me in silence. And as the shards glittered at my feet, I felt no fear. Only triumph. The final act was approaching. Adrian had secured the last piece, evidence that Marcus had falsified contracts tied directly to Ethan's schemes. Together, they weren't just business partners, they were co-conspirators, and the line between their crimes was blurred beyond repair. One release to the right outlet, and Marcus would follow Ethan into ruin. I stood at the balcony that night, the city blazing beneath me, and breathed in the cool air. My revenge was nearly complete. Soon the world would see Marcus Hale not as the man who once humiliated me, but as the man brought to his knees by the woman he had underestimated. And this time, when he begged, when he broke, I would not look away. I would savor every second of his fall. The day I unleashed Marcus's secrets was not chosen at random. It was his company's anniversary gala, a spectacle he had been preparing for months, one where the city's elite, investors, and press would all be watching. In my first life, I had been nothing more than an ornament on his arm at such events, smiling for cameras while he basked in glory. This time, I was the storm waiting in silence. I wore a crimson gown that drew every eye in the room, walking in beside him like a queen beside a king who no longer deserved his throne. He smiled for the cameras, but I could feel the tremor in his hand as it rested on mine, his empire already cracking beneath his feet. Adrian's final package had gone out hours before the gala began, sent to journalists and regulators at once. It would only be a matter of time before phones started buzzing and whispers spread through the glittering ballroom like wildfire. I didn't need to expose him myself. The world would do it for me. The first sign came during his speech. Marcus stood at the podium, confidently praising Hale Enterprises, his voice practiced and commanding. But midway through, murmurs rippled through the crowd. People checked their phones, exchanged sharp glances, some rising from their seats to whisper to others. I watched the confusion flicker in Marcus's eyes, saw him falter for just a fraction of a second. Then he pressed on, desperate to maintain control, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, spreading like flames catching velvet curtains. The journalists began leaving their seats, cameras flashing more frantically, not for his words but for the scandal breaking outside these gilded walls. I sipped my champagne, my smile calm, my heart steady. The timing was flawless. By the time Marcus finished his speech, the ballroom was no longer his stage, it was his execution ground. A board member approached him, face pale, handing him a phone. He froze, staring at whatever headline screamed from the screen, and I knew in that moment he had seen it, the proof of his fraud, his laundering, his betrayal. He tried to compose himself, tried to dismiss it as lies, but the damage was already done. Investors whispered about resigning, allies slipped out of the room, and Marcus stood stranded, his empire dissolving in real time. When he finally returned to our table, his face was tight, his glass clutched so hard I thought it might shatter. "Did you know about this?" he hissed under his breath. I tilted my head, feigning innocence, and said softly, "Know about what, Marcus? That your lies finally caught up with you?" The way his eyes widened, rage, disbelief, a flicker of realization, was everything I had waited for. He whispered my name like a curse, his hand trembling, but he couldn't make a scene. Not here. Not while cameras still flashed and guests still watched. He was trapped, and I savored every second of it. After the gala, the news was unstoppable. Regulators announced investigations, shareholders demanded his resignation, and journalists hounded his every move. Marcus retreated to the penthouse, his world collapsing around him. I found him there one night, papers scattered across the floor, his tie hanging loose, his eyes bloodshot. He looked up at me, broken in a way I had never seen before. "It was you," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You did this to me." I stepped closer, no pity in my gaze. "No, Marcus. You did this to yourself. I just let the world see the truth." He laughed bitterly, collapsing into his chair. "I made you. Without me, you were nothing. And this is how you repay me?" His words might have once cut me, but now they were hollow. I leaned down, my voice sharp as glass. "You didn't make me. You destroyed me. And when you let me burn, you taught me exactly how to destroy you. His face twisted, rage mixing with regret, but he had no power left. For the first time, I saw Marcus Hale as he truly was, not a titan, not a king, but a man undone by his own arrogance. And yet, even as I stood victorious, a shadow lingered. He wasn't finished, not entirely. A man like Marcus wouldn't go down quietly. He would thrash, claw, try to take me with him into the ashes. And I was ready. Because unlike before, I was not the woman begging for his love, not the bride humiliated on her wedding day. I was the woman who had risen from the ashes, and I would watch him choke on the smoke of his own downfall. The end was close, and I would make sure Marcus Hale never forgot the name Rose Lancaster again. The end came faster than even I imagined. Within days of the gala, regulators froze Marcus's accounts, board members convened emergency sessions, and investors lined up to distance themselves. Hale Enterprises, once an untouchable empire, was suddenly a sinking ship with Marcus chained to its deck. I stayed by his side in public appearances, the picture of composure, while privately feeding more fuel to the blaze. Every whispered leak, every damning file, every subtle maneuver ensured that there was no escape for him. And yet he clung to me, as though I were the last anchor he had left, not realizing I had been the one pulling him under all along. The breaking point came at his final board meeting. I was there when the vote was cast, when his own directors, men who once toasted him, who feared him, turned their hands against him and demanded his resignation. His voice thundered across the room, trying to command, to intimidate, but it was hollow now. No one listened. The final tally was unanimous. Marcus Hale was ousted from his own company. I watched the color drain from his face, and in that silence, I felt the final piece of my revenge click into place. He had humiliated me in front of the world once, but now I had taken everything that defined him. His empire, his power, his pride. That night, back in the penthouse, Marcus confronted me for the last time. His eyes were wild, his voice low and dangerous. "It was always you," he said, stepping closer. "You ruined me." I didn't flinch. "You ruined yourself," I replied, my tone calm and sharp. "I only gave the world the truth you tried to hide." He gripped the back of a chair like he might throw it, but then something shifted in his expression. The rage gave way to something else, desperation, regret, even sorrow. His voice cracked. "Rose. I loved you. I didn't protect you, and I lost you. And now, I've lost everything." For a moment, I saw not the monster who had abandoned me, but the broken man left behind. But pity was a luxury I no longer had. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so he couldn't mistake my words. "No, Marcus. You never lost me. You threw me away. And this time I made sure you'll never get me back." I left him there in the ruins of his empire now belonging to the vultures who circled him. When I walked out, Adrian was waiting by the car. His eyes searched mine, reading the storm of emotions I didn't dare show Marcus. "It's done," he said quietly. I nodded. "It's done." But it wasn't just victory I felt, it was freedom. For the first time since my rebirth, I wasn't weighed down by the shadow of Marcus Hale. He was finished, and I was alive, powerful, untouchable. The headlines the next morning were merciless: Marcus Hale exposed. Hale Enterprises in collapse. But the one that mattered most to me was the whisper spreading across high society: the woman he destroyed had risen, and she had destroyed him in return. Rose Lancaster wasn't a scandal anymore. I was the story, the survivor, the victor. And as I stood beside Adrian, watching the skyline from the balcony of his office, I knew my life was no longer defined by revenge alone. I had built something stronger, sharper, and entirely mine. Marcus would spend the rest of his days drowning in regret, haunted by the woman he once humiliated. I had been reborn the night of my scandal. And this time I didn't just survive it. I ended him.